Hello and welcome to the Women in Renewable Energy's very first video spotlight interview. My name is Raina Halabi and I'm a freelance writer for WiRE. And today I have the privilege of speaking with Heather Ferguson, who is a distinguished leader in the renewable energy industry. And so thank you so much, Heather, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course, yeah. So I'll introduce Heather a little bit. So Heather is currently the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Corporate Affairs at Ontario Power Generation. And one of the reasons why I'm particularly excited to speak with Heather today is because I recently attended a WiRE event that was held at OPG at the Darlington site. And I was able to go on the tour, and I was really so energized by everything that I learned. Um, in addition to how much I learned, something I really appreciated about OPG was all of your colleagues were very kind and genuine. And I found that everyone had a real sense of pride and ownership in their work, which is really interesting, really cool to see at such a large organization. So yes, I'm very excited to speak with you today.
A great time in the industry, and it's understandable that folks at Darlington are as excited as they are. There's been a real excitement in the nuclear industry, and maybe one we haven't seen in recent years. People are saying it's a bit of a renaissance. So I know the folks at Darlington are very engaged. I mean, they're operating an existing plant. They're also going through a refurbishment itself, as well as contemplating 4 new SMRs at Darlington, as well as a whole host of other things in the sector. So they're very excited, and yeah, they do take a real pride in the site. So I'm glad you had such a good experience.
Yeah, and I didn't previously hadn't had any exposure to SMRs before that, and so I'd love to learn a little bit more about those in our chat today. But to start, I'm really interested in the career that you've had. You've had an amazing career, and I'd love for viewers to learn a little bit about it. And so, to start, would you mind sharing a little bit about your journey into the renewable energy industry, specifically your introduction to it, how you first got involved?
Sure. Well, I mean, whenever I'm talking about this, I sort of start at the beginning, and sometimes people are really surprised at what the beginning was, and sometimes people are like, "Well, that makes sense," and it's good to see, an evolution over time. But I actually began my career as a biologist, and I was in Ontario. Had completed an undergrad and a master's in biology, and like many biologists of that time, there really weren't a lot of jobs in the sector for a biologist. Maybe that's not surprising. So I moved out west. I moved to Calgary. Not unlike today, it was going through a bit of a boom. There was a ton of work for folks with my background in environmental and engineering consulting. So that was really my first foray into the energy sector. It wasn't so much the renewable energy sector. It was a lot of oil and gas, mining, pipelines, that sort of work. But it really gave me some exposure to energy resource development. And I spent a few years there, got to work on some of the most interesting projects, and it really sort of it piqued my interest. But I kind of wanted to come back to. I came back to Ontario, and I thought, well, I'm just a biologist here. I should really, I should round my skill set out. I should kind of do something about that. So I did an MBA, and then at the end of that, I was really fortunate to literally stumble upon an event that was being organized at Rotman, as they sometimes do for graduating students. But also there was a whole host of folks from OPG there doing, sort of a Rotman type talk themselves. So they kind of mixed the two together, sort of soon to be graduates with these OPG types. And I listened to some of the folks from OPG there and just thought it sounded really, really, really interesting. And this is 23 years ago. So this isn't just a few years ago. This is a while ago. But that kind of was the beginning of it. And I shortly thereafter joined OPG, and I've been very fortunate to have worked for some pretty amazing leaders at the company who have taught me a lot, and who I would say, took some chances on me that, I took some portfolios that were brand new to me and areas that I hadn't been through before. So that was really the exciting learning opportunity. And then here I am today, leading a pretty interesting portfolio that no 2 days are ever the same. And the company's come a long way in those 23 years as well. And I don't think it's ever been quite as exciting as it is now. So it's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, when you had mentioned that you'd gone to that Rotman event and there was the OPG presence there, I'm really not surprised that you had connected with those people. Like as I said, just from that one site visit that I did, I was really impressed with the establishment and how everyone really cares about the quality of their work, which I think is really special.
Yeah, we're at probably the best place we've ever been as a company. For a few reasons. I mean, the growth trajectory is there. The
Yeah,
energy business is a very exciting place with all that's happening, but it's also a bit about how the leadership has evolved at OPG and our way of thinking. And perhaps 20 years ago, there was a bit more of a rigid view of what roles needed to look like, what skill sets were needed. 20 years ago, I would have looked at the top of the house there and not really seen, where someone with my background would have fit in. And I think over time, the organization's evolved. And I think, the leaders that have come in and led this company in the last 5 to 10 years look at things a little differently than they used to, and have looked a bit at, having a diverse leadership team, having a leadership team with a host of skill sets and perspectives. And as I said, it's been a very, very exciting place to work.
yeah, definitely. It seems like it. So as I mentioned, you're the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Corporate Affairs at OPG. So can you share a little bit about the specifics in your role and maybe give us a look into a day in the life?
Yeah, and I'll say no 2 days in the life of this role are ever the same. And maybe that's true of a great many roles at OPG, which is maybe what makes it so interesting. But so the portfolio I have has kind of got two angles to it, two sides to it. One is the corporate affairs side, and the other is the business development side. And the corporate affairs side is really all the outward facing relationships that we have as a company. So that's government relations, public relations, media relations, indigenous relations, all our stakeholders, including our shareholders. So that's the province of Ontario. So it's everything outward facing. And as you can probably manage, any one day is going to be very, very, very different. So a day in the life will start off with getting up in the morning and kind of regrouping on what's happened in the previous 12 hours. This business is a 24/7 operation, but also, things evolve every day. And so you get up, what's in the media this morning, what issues have surfaced, what are some of the things that some of our stakeholders could be looking at, could be concerned about. So every day is a bit different that way. Also, the Indigenous relations portfolio is a very, very, very interesting file right now, and a lot going on in that space. So that the file can be varied every day, but also, where am I going and what am I doing? Am I heading into the office to spend some time with the team? Am I traveling to an event, or am I, going to meet with a stakeholder, or am I going on a site visit? That's a possibility too. So there's a lot of that. I'd say quite rarely are we working from home these days. There's quite a bit of time now back in the office, out at sites, at events, or whatever it might need to be. And then the business development side of things. So that's leading the hydro business development portfolio. So we're looking at opportunities to build out northern greenfield hydro. So I could be involved in some meetings up north, or I could be down here with the team, sort of strategizing and how we move that further ahead. So it's constantly changing, which is probably what makes it still exciting after 23 years.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of industry trends. You mentioned it is a very exciting time in the space. I'm certainly very interested in the all the changes that are happening in renewable energy. So, could you share maybe from your vantage point, what are the current trends that you're seeing shaping the industry, and how do you see those trends evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main global trend that we're all seeing is wrapped up around climate change and the concerns around climate change, and really a broad need to not just decarbonize our electricity sector, but to decarbonize the whole economy. And what does that take? That's going to take a whole lot of clean electricity and clean energy. So I'd say all eyes are on that. And it does span but beyond the electricity grid. So in Ontario, we're very fortunate. We have a fairly clean electricity grid. And that's in large part because we closed coal back in 2014. And that was 9,000 megawatts of coal we took out of the system over a 10-year period. So we have a relatively clean electricity grid to start with. But then we have to think, well, what are we going to do with that grid to power the sectors that are not as clean? So if you look at heavy industry, if you look at transportation, if you look at home heating, and this will evolve over time. So the broad trend in a very, very clear way is to decarbonize. And so with that comes a whole host of challenges because some things are pretty hard to decarbonize, but even more so are a lot of really amazing opportunities in this sector. So it's a really exciting time. The other trend, and I don't really like to call it so much a trend, but it's an opportunity, and it's a very, very important aspect of all the work we do in the sector, and certainly at OPG is looking at Indigenous reconciliation. I think everybody has hopefully got a bit of familiarity with that, and probably more and more each day, which I think is great because this isn't about us knowing everything as we start. It's about listening and learning as we go along. But that factors into so many aspects of what everyone is trying to do in the sector, and certainly what OPG is trying to do. And what that looks like on a day in day out basis is we have commitments we've made around Indigenous reconciliation, and what are we going to try to accomplish as a company. We have a target of $1 billion over 10 years, so that's $1 billion of economic benefit to Indigenous communities. So we chip away at that every day. We have equity partnerships in a number of our developments that we've built over the past number of years, and we plan many, many more like that to continue to contribute. But we also have things going on in supply chain, in our procurement processes, looking where we can partner with Indigenous businesses, ensure that Indigenous vendors are part of our supply chain as well. And then the last piece we spend a lot of time on is like, how can we employ more Indigenous people? Like we have not done a very good job of that in recent history at all. Well, never mind recent history, in ancient history and recent history. We're just not where we need to be in terms of doing that, and whether we've not put the right amount of thought into the training and the supporting Indigenous community members to be part of that population with the jobs at OPG. I'm not sure what we haven't done as well, but we're putting all eyes on that. And I know we're not alone. I know almost every player in the energy and the electricity sector and much beyond that is thinking about that, and it's an incredibly important part of the work that we do.
I was going to ask you, you'd mentioned earlier that the Indigenous file that you're working on is quite exciting, and I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that, and you did, and that's really incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. I also wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges? There's a lot of excitement and opportunities that we mentioned in the renewable energy space. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are currently being faced?
Yeah, and these challenges aren't really unique to nuclear, because I think actually, as I mentioned, it's wonderful to see sort of a renewed attention and focus on what nuclear can bring to the climate change equation. So it's come far in the last little while from that perspective, but it faces challenges that actually many other and other forms of generation face. We're thinking where are we going to get all the bright people to do all the things we need to do? So if we look at the grid in Ontario, the ISO has speculated we could need 18,000 megawatts of nuclear by 2050. That is a whole lot of new nuclear. And so where are we going to get all the people to help develop, build, and operate that? So it's a good challenge to have, because that means there'll be a lot of opportunity, but we need to come together with our industry partners across Ontario, across the country, and I think we do that. Not that we aren't doing that, but we need to do more of that, to think about how are we going to build up the talent that we need, and not just the talent from, say, a skilled trades perspective, but also from an engineering and technical and management and leadership. All of these people are going to be needed, and they're not just going to be needed in nuclear. They're going to be needed in every other form of renewable energy and in a whole host of jurisdictions. So it's not as if we can sort of look across the border and say, okay, let's get them from Quebec, or let's get them from Manitoba, or let's get them from the States. Every jurisdiction is going to be needing the talent. So I would say that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and I know almost every leadership team and board at every company is thinking about that as well. And then the other side of that is how are we going to pay for and finance all of these massive build outs. And not just nuclear again, like the entire electricity grid across North America and elsewhere needs to be built out, and that's going to take an awful lot of capital. So I know that a lot of governments are thinking about that and how ways to help attract private capital, because it's not something that can just be on the backs of governments to compensate and pay for all of this. So again, I would say every leadership team and board is thinking, how do you finance this massive build out? So that would be the second challenge.
Something that I appreciated in that response is how like holistic it was. Like it's very clear that from your experience, you're able to look at all these different viewpoints that are necessary, in the challenges that the renewable energy sector is facing. You mentioned that just the supply of energy is going to be something that is a challenge and that we need to work on. And when I had visited the OPG Darlington site, I was able to learn about the SMR project. So I would love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean it's a really exciting time, and it's an exciting project, and it's just the beginning of something, and maybe that's what makes it so exciting. So the SMRs that are planned to be built at Darlington, there'll be four grid scale SMRs, and those will be the first grid scale SMRs in North America. So it's a first of a kind. So some of that might be a little bit daunting, but I think we've got the team to focus on that and deliver it successfully. So doing the first of a kind is always a bit exciting as well. But it's not just about putting four SMRs at Darlington. So four 300 megawatt SMRs at Darlington, that's just the first step in what will be sort of a broader, hopefully a fleet-wide build out. So there's other provinces that are needing to decarbonize, potentially in a bigger way than Ontario has recently. But they will be looking also to nuclear technologies. So, Saskatchewan is contemplating whether SMRs are a good replacement for their assets. Alberta, New Brunswick is also looking at SMRs. So it's an opportunity to do a first of a kind and then partner with jurisdictions across the country and support them in the build out of SMR. So it's just the beginning of something really big. And I think other provinces are looking to partner maybe with OPG, given we've been operating nuclear plants for the last 50 years or so. So have some experience that we can share and can support and help others.
Yeah, wow, it's very exciting. In addition to the SMR project, I know that that's certainly not the only thing that OPG is working on. Can you share a little bit more about what other projects that OPG is working on that would have a significant impact on the sustainable energy sector?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Certainly nuclear is the big focus, but OPG is actually one of the most diverse generating companies in North America. Or we just have we've got hydro, we've got nuclear, we've got a little bit of solar, we've got biomass, we've got gas, and a whole host of subsidiaries too. So I thought I'd maybe mention, maybe a couple lesser known subsidiaries of OPG. So we have a subsidiary called Power On, and it's all about transit and fleet electrification. And it has been really picking up steam lately. So it's partnered with the TTC to electrify their transit fleet. So TTC, one of the largest transit agencies in North America, but they're also working with Oakville, Barrie, Milton Transit on electrifying their transits, and also even Regina. So has moved out of just Ontario and is focusing more broadly. So when you think about decarbonization, and as I mentioned, the electricity sector in Ontario is in a pretty good place to be supporting the decarbonization of transportation, a sector which arguably contributes an awful lot more to GHG emissions in Ontario. This is an important part of that equation. So it's important to think about your own personal vehicle and an EV, but the transits are out there, and that's a big part of it. So I want to give a little bit of a call out to that team and the work that they're doing and the important part of it. And then the other is, we have Atura. So that's the, the organization that owns our four combined cycle gas plants in Ontario. But they are building out sort of the renewable end of their business a bit. And they are breaking ground, or just recently broke ground, on their Niagara hydrogen complex. And this is one of the first in the province. And one of the largest and one of the most economic as well, because it's a behind the meter hydrogen solution. So they're using, I guess you could say, water that otherwise would have been spilled at our Beck facility to power the electrolyzer to produce hydrogen. So it's a pretty exciting proposition they have there. They're also looking at building out at Halton Hills, another one of their gas plants. So hydrogen for multiple purposes, whether it's for the transportation sector or, feedstock into the combined cycle gas plants or for other uses. Just many eyes are on what the value of hydrogen will be as we look to decarbonize the grid over time. And so WiRE is doing some really exciting work to sort of understand what does it look like to produce hydrogen in a behind the meter electrolyzer? What does it look like to blend hydrogen in a combined cycle gas plant to reduce emissions? And then who knows where it goes from there. So doing some really exciting work.
I can't stop smiling with how excited I am of all these different efforts, for decarbonization and helping us be more gentle on the earth, right? So that's such great perspective. Thank you so much for sharing that. The next thing I wanted to chat with you on was your industry outlook. So obviously it's a very exciting time, but just looking ahead, can you talk about how you envision the future of the industry?
I don't think I know, because if you think about how much has happened in the last 5 years, if not even remember 5 years, 2 years, but let's say 5 years. I mean, would we ever have imagined that nuclear would be where it is? Would we ever have imagined that electric vehicles more broadly across North America and the world would be where they are? Would we ever have imagined, well, for that matter, that climate change would be as big of an imperative it is now? All the things. I think it would be hard to imagine. So as I look ahead, I don't know, but I'm quite confident that it'll look very different and that many of the technological advances that are going to need to evolve and to evolve at scale in an economic way are going to find the way, because, a little bit of capital, a lot of smart brains, and a commitment to working on something usually has a way to get something unstuck. And as I said, I don't know what it's going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years, but I'm sure it'll be a very interesting place. And a lot of things will have evolved that we can't even begin to imagine right now.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very exciting time. I wanted to shift gears a little bit into your career. And specifically, what advice would you offer to those aspiring to enter and make a difference in the renewable energy sector?
Yeah, I mean, so I gave a bit of a flavor of where I began as an unemployed biologist. So that sort of flavors, I think, advice that I sometimes give to folks, particularly young folks who are, many, many young folks. I mean, I've got kids as well who are, inspired and interested in renewable energy and clean energy and climate change. Again, there's going to be an abundance of opportunities. The growth that's going to be happening in this sector is huge. So there's lots of opportunity. But this sounds a bit like maternal advice, but it's, work hard. There is never any substitution or way around working hard. And be a bit patient. Just remember that, just be a little bit patient, because things sometimes take a little bit longer than I sometimes think people want it to take to fall into place. Sometimes that's my sense. But with a bit of hard work and a bit of patience, you'd be surprised at what might fall into place. We're in a place where there's a lot of opportunity, and you work hard. The other piece is take some risks and be a bit adventurous. And I think that's, maybe that's reflective of, if we think about the energy, electricity, renewable sector now, the opportunity that I spoke about is probably going to be one where there's going to be some wins for people who take some risks and are a bit adventurous, just because I said there's a whole host of things that need to get solved, and not everybody has those answers. So being someone who's maybe prepared to be a bit adventurous and take some risks might be really beneficial in the end.
Yeah, definitely. That's really great advice.
We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, well, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience before we wrapped up today? Anything that I didn't touch on that you wanted to share?
Oh, just a big thank you to Joanna and the whole WiRE team for giving me this opportunity and for all the work they do. I think it's a fantastic organization, and thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. And I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to have this discussion with you. So, for the audience, thank you so much for watching this interview. And I would suggest that you stay tuned for more insightful spotlights on the Women in Renewable Energies website. And also be sure to check out their events page, because through that events page, I found out about that really great event at OPG that I attended, and I learned so much. And it was a really fun experience. So, with that, thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you.